Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 507. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 507 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. In this episode, we are going to be discussing the topic of designing an internal BAS training program that actually works. So pretty much on a weekly basis now, I get reached out to by folks who are at OEMs, folks who are at distributors, folks that are at contractors, folks that are at owner-operators, and get asked, how do we design an internal BAS training program? And how do we do it in such a way that it actually goes and generates results? And we'll talk about, like, how do you actually define results? How do you actually determine that something's working? How do you decide if you're going to allocate money to it and how much money you're going to allocate to it? So by the end of this episode, you should understand the problem with most internal BAS training programs, the core principles of a BAS training program that works, a step-by-step framework for building your own program if you so choose, tools and resources to accelerate training, and then we'll talk through kind of some real-world examples and some common mistakes to avoid, and then from there we'll recap. So hopefully this goes as planned. I haven't scripted this out too much, so we'll see. All right, so when I talk with folks and I say, hey, why do you want to build a BAS training program? I usually get a couple answers. One, we don't have enough people to staff and man up projects. Two, and this is especially true in the owner-operator space, we can't find people in the market or the contractors are outpaying us. Three, I'll get that a lot of people are going to be retiring and they want to build capacity. And four, they've had bad experiences with recruiters. They're just not having any luck out there in the market. So if we think through kind of those four buckets here, having to build capacity, having to replace people who are retiring, not having success, kind of stealing other people's folks, and then not being able to find people on the owner side of things. Why is that? Why do we struggle with that? And really, why is the thought process to go to, I have to build my own? And do you have to build your own? Obviously, I'm biased, like you all, to come to Smart Buildings Academy. We're the largest training provider in the United States and quite possibly the world for building automation training. But let's say you want to build your own. Let's talk through that. Let's talk through kind of what layers of that could be, because you probably don't need to build this massive university. At the same time, just doing weekly team trainings probably not going to get you the outcomes you want. So what are the problems I see? Because let's kind of talk about those first, and then let's talk about some core principles. So I see a lot of focus on vendor-specific training. While that's good, our skill assessment, of which it's drawing really close to 30,000 people who have been through it, I'm super stoked. It gives us a snapshot that no one else has in the industry of technical skill set across multiple different geographies, company sizes, vertical markets. And from this, we're able to see statistically building automation fundamentals, so electrical theory, IO theory, PID theory, things of that nature, control system theory, like floating versus sequence control versus, PID control, PI control. By and large, very low scores. On the service side of things, we see higher HVAC scores because a lot of people try to use mechanics for service. On the construction side of things, we tend to see pretty low HVAC scores. We tend to see the HVAC bifurcated. We tend to see that people have a terminal unit and air handler experience, but no central utility plant experience. And that tends to show up when people do a lot of commercial real estate work. They don't really get into hospitals. They don't get into areas with complex central plants. So we see that. IT scores are abysmal across the industry. 30% is a is a good score if people hit it, and that's pretty bad score in my opinion. But that tends to be where people float, is in that 30 to 40%. And then also troubleshooting. Troubleshooting is a skill that people really struggle with. They get stuck. They don't understand protocols. They don't understand how to think from a troubleshooting mindset. So problem is, outside of our training, there's not really anything out there that focuses on that. So that's your like biggest thing that you're whacking your head against right off the bat when you come in and you want to upskill your team, is like, how do we get the three legs of the stool, as I like to call them, which are electrical, HVAC, and IT. You need those three to be able to support the stool, which is BAS knowledge. And then on the stool, you're going to set your vendor specific trainings, your GFX training, your web control training, your facility explorer training, whatever. You're going to set those on the stool. But if any one of those legs of the stool is weak, the stool's going to topple over. If you don't understand IT, then going and trying to connect to a controller is going to be a nightmare. If you don't understand electrical, you're going to be popping relays on your controllers. If you don't understand the HVAC side, you can get your controller online and fully calibrated, and it won't work because you don't actually know what you're doing. So you got to build those three. So right off the bat, I tell folks, hey, you got to get the skills-based training. People try to do information overload. They try to throw their technicians into just these multiple day-long seminars. They never get any OJT. They don't get any reinforcement. This was kind of one of my frustrations when I used to go to those week-long classes, is you'd get put in this class, you'd go through the learning, and then you would never get a chance to actually use the skill because you get put on some job where you're not even using it. A lot of people do not have clear success metrics in training. They don't have a baseline. They don't have a post-assessment. They don't have a way to evaluate the delta, so they don't know if their investment was worthwhile. As a CEO of a business, I'm constantly thinking about the ROI of any spend I make, especially privately held business. Every dollar I spend ultimately comes out of my pocket. It's directly comes out of my pocket, especially just due to the financial structure that we have in the business. So that is something that, you know, you really got to think through. How does this go and produce an ROI? And then how do you retain these skills? How do you measure them? And more importantly, how do you retain people, which will be a future episode that we do. All right. So I've found in running a training business now for almost 8 years, 16,000 students, 20,000 plus assessments, working with major universities, hospitals, OEMs, contractors across the globe. I found 4 key principles that work for training, and you're going to want to write these down. If you're sitting here and you're like, hey, what do I do? A principle-based approach, in my opinion, is the best way to do it. Principle 1 is going to be skill-based, not product-based. You can always go to your distributor, your OEM, and get some product training. It makes no sense for you to build a product training, in my opinion. You want to focus on fundamentals, so electrical theory, understanding Ohm's law, understanding transformers, load profiles, all that jazz. You want to teach sequences. Sequences, a lot of people get stuck on HVAC sequences, but when you learn to read them, they're actually pretty logical. And they can parallel pretty well to programming. It's not very hard. I know I say that and it's like, Phil, it actually is. It comparatively, building out teaching people sequences, if you teach them the underlying HVAC theory, not too bad. Teaching people logic, troubleshooting, networking, all of that stuff. Because in reality, I've yet to run into a service call that was because someone didn't know how to use, well, that's not exactly true. The majority of the service calls I've run into are not because someone doesn't know how to use the graphical user interface for a Metasys or a Decigo or web control or whatever system, it is because people didn't understand the theory behind what they were doing. So principle one, skill-based. Focus on skill-based. You'll see the greatest returns there. You'll be shocked how many of your highly skilled people actually don't understand basic theory. Principle two, modular and progressive. So we want to have short, quick hit learnings that build upon one another. One of the questions we get whenever we engage customers and they're like, hey, how is your training any different? Why can you produce the results? Because when we tell them like we can get an 80% job chargeable resource developed in 4 weeks, they could be on a job by themselves doing everything but programming in 11. People are like, that's bull crap. How do you do it? And when we explain to them that unlike a trade school, unlike a traditional training program, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, I'm making air quotes when I emphasize those words on my voice. What actually is happening is when we teach, for example, our control sequences course, and we teach terminal units, we know that some of those concepts are going to carry over to air handlers, which are directly going to carry over to pumping, which is directly going to carry over to central utility plants. So if you teach VAV-based air handlers with differential pressure control, with boxes that open and could close based on pressure and flow, you are teaching in theory, a little bit different, the exact same things of a primary, secondary chilled water system. You've got differential pressure, you've got valves that open and close, unless like they're pressure independent, stuff like that. But you've got all sorts of things going on that if you teach it initially in little microdoses, it all adds up. And that's how you're able to get really good results from really short amount of trainings. And then immediately applying it, immediately going into OJT. This is something we're heavily evaluating in some of our courses, is like, how do we add even more OJT opportunities? Funny story. So I'm always doing some different form of learning right now. I'm getting my wilderness first responder certification because I'm kind of crazy like that. I like to be prepared, and just the world is chaos. So anywho, I'm going and I'm getting that certification right now. And it's interesting because I'm doing it online because I just could not get to a 2-week class up in Flagstaff because I live in central Arizona, and just didn't have time to get to the class. And because of that, I'm having to do it online and having to figure out how to apply the hands-on exercises. While it's fun using your wife as the test subject for all of your medical experiments, at the same time, it's really important that I'm disciplined to do those hands-on exercises, because it's not the same if you learn but you don't actually touch. There's a kinesthetic aspect, and I feel like a lot of people are drawn, and kinesthetic is touch, by the way. I feel like a lot of people are drawn to this industry based on they want to work with their hands. And so immediately applying. And then measuring and feedback loops. You've got to have a way to assess before and assess after. Now, these could be quantitative skill assessments. I will tell you, to build our skill assessment took thousands upon thousands of hours. I don't recommend anyone do it. It is a bear. And then to really do it right, you've got to be evaluating questions and throwing out questions if people get them wrong, and looking at weighting and all that jazz. But one thing you can do is you can do pre and post assessments of installing a actuator on a damper shaft, or going and doing an IO setup, or mapping in a controller. So how do you build your current program? So there, in my opinion, are 6 steps to building any program. Step 1 is you need to go and define your core competencies. Like, what are you trying to train? And then at the end of this training, what shall they be able to do? And this should be in verb format, like demonstrate this, understand that. That's like very low on Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is kind of a hierarchy of learning versus implement or wire. It should be an action that they're able to do. If you can't go and say that the person after this training is going to be able to do these things, then you can't evaluate if they can do those things, 1, before the training, and 2, after the training, and 3, that training's probably not aligned to their job. So once you've decided what they should be able to do, and ideally that training is aligned with their job because you want to improve things that improve their profitability, their utilization, their reducing of callbacks, reducing the slippage, etc. Then from there, we're going to assess current skill gaps. We're going to say, okay, you should be able to do this. Show me that you can do it. And they're like, oh, I can't do it. I don't know how to use this tool or whatever. And then you're like, okay, great. Well, now we're going to do our training. And training typically comes in 3 buckets. 1 will be fundamentals. This is like core knowledge. 2 is going to be like applied knowledge. How do you do stuff? And then 3 is kind of this gray zone. It's how do you do things, but how do you do them when the situation is varied? So been through some different vendor trainings, and it's almost always the same. You're doing a rooftop unit, you're doing a boiler with 2 circ pumps. You're going to follow this very established pattern for that 5-day class that almost every vendor training program seems to follow the exact same layout. Now, what happens when you go out to a site and it's different? It has 4 pumps, it has 3 pumps, it has a pony chiller, it has whatever. Things are different. Do you fall apart, or can you take that fundamental knowledge and that applied knowledge and kind of deduce how do you do some like advanced reasoning and figuring things out, problem solving basically. So that level 1, the fundamentals, it's almost always just PowerPoint, instructional, observational. It's teaching. You're teaching at the person. That level 2, that applied knowledge, that is them doing and you giving feedback. Level 3 knowledge is problem solving. You give them use case scenarios that entail the fundamental knowledge and the applied knowledge, but they have to take that and then they have to problem solve a novel problem, a new problem, something they haven't seen. So you do that. And in an ideal world, you'll be integrating that level 3 with real projects and field mentoring. So they'll be shadowing people. This is where things tend to fall apart. It's the hardest thing. If you don't have a good mentor onboarding and disciplining program for your mentors to keep them on track, things are going to be rough. You want to establish KPIs, right? You want to benchmark callbacks, benchmark their utilization, benchmark their efficiency. This is why in previous episodes I've talked about getting really granular on task codes so that you understand what your businesses are doing, and then benchmarking those, and then measuring those and setting goals. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there's no like best in class standards for things. It's kind of all just tribal knowledge that people have picked up. Like, hey, if you can hit 85 to 90% utilization, that's pretty good because you're factoring in vacation and all sorts of stuff. If you could be 1% to less than 1% slippage on a project, that's pretty good, depending on the volume of the project. So these are all kind of things. And then, so, right, we've went through defining our core competencies. We've went through assessing our gaps. We've went through created tiered training levels, integrating real projects. That's number 4, establishing our KPIs. That's number 5. And then number 6 is we want to reinforce and grow those skills. So usually I will say to people, pick 3 to 4 skills that apply across your organization, work on those for the year, maybe 1 skill a quarter, and refreshing those. That tends to be pretty solid. Let's talk about tools you need, tools you don't need. Learning management systems, unless you're building a huge formal program with a program administrator, which you better have a damn good ROI case for that, because that is expensive. As someone who builds training programs for a living, it is expensive, especially if you want to do it fast and well, because there's that whole like project management kind of triangle, right? You've got speed, you've got quality, and you've got cost. So we have designed our business that we want high quality, high speed. Therefore, it costs us a lot to have instructors, and it costs us a lot to develop. Whereas a other organization may take 2 to 3 years to build a program, we build programs in 3 to 4 months that are of equal, if not better quality in the feedback that we've received from our students and customers. So it costs a lot of money if you want to do it fast. And if you're building this as a contractor, if you're building this as part of a strategy, usually, unless you're an OEM, is to solve an immediate program. So I tend to highly recommend either buy a program, implement it, or build, but recognize that you're going to be building pieces of it. Learning management systems, very expensive. Implementing learning management systems, even more expensive. Building up simulations and virtual labs, forget about it. As a contractor, anything technology that you need to build like that, don't do it. It is prohibitively expensive. You honestly would be better off taking that money, dumping it into some senior techs than building that out. What I really recommend you do is get with your HR, make sure you have job descriptions, make sure they are accurate. They are the verb-based tasks that your people do, and the verb-based tasks in order of importance, that Pareto principle. What are the 20% of the things they do that have that 80% effect on a project? Really narrow those down, figure them out. Like a technician, let's say they are a startup technician. While it would be amazing for them to be able to do programming, that'd be great. I highly doubt that is what they do the majority of their time. So dumping a ton of time and money to train a startup tech who you need to do startup to be a proficient programmer, probably not the best use of your time, money, and efforts. So really figure out what tasks, 3 to 4 tasks a year. If you can get those mastered, you will be in a much better place. Like if you could get your startup techs to be perfect on point-to-point calibration, as well as making sure their subs are perfect, on going and doing functional test, on going and doing, let's say, graphics and point mapping, and point extensions, you get them to do those 4 things, you've knocked out a good chunk of a project. Heck, if you get people to set up backnet networks right and easily map in controllers, you've knocked out a huge chunk of a project. So really like focus in on that. Obviously, this is different if you're an OEM and you're building a full training program, or if you're like a national contractor and you're trying to build your own university, which I still don't recommend. It'd be like us. We could probably build an amazing contracting business. Or like the other day I was asked, why don't we do recruiting? We could probably do an amazing job in recruiting. But would that make sense? That is so different from what we do right now. I don't think it would make sense. All right, so let's keep moving along. Let's talk about some like real world examples that I will do my best to obfuscate. So working with a large organization, they desperately need technicians. And so what they want to do is they want to build a onboarding program for new technicians. The challenge is that they do not have corporate level sponsorship. They have local level sponsorship. So that's one thing we didn't really discuss in this episode is levels of sponsorship. So if you only have local level sponsorship, you're only going to have local level resources. Now that doesn't mean you can't go and create a good program. I think people think of creating a training program that works and they think of it as it's got to have PowerPoints. It's got to have formalized teaching. It's got to have quizzes. We've got to have an LMS. We've got to measure people. We have that stuff because we're a formal training org. We have accreditation. We have requirements that you don't have. Quite simply, if I were talking to, which I am talking to this person in this case, I would say, what are the 3 to 4 things that if your people were able to do would reduce 5 to 15% of your callback issues? And they would probably say that if they had people who could go out and diagnose if it was a controls issue or a mechanical issue, that would reduce a lot of issues and callbacks. If they had a way of lining out their subcontractors and ensuring that their subs were doing the right work, that would reduce issues. If they had a reliable way of going and making sure their networks were set up, communicating, that would solve some issues. So we got 3 things right there. So how do we tackle that? Okay, how do you diagnose if it's a controls issue? Flowchart. The beautiful thing about controls is there's only so many ways that something can go wrong. So build out a simple flowchart. Here's the electrical checks. Here's the mechanical checks. Here's the controls checks. Have your people check that. Even if they're 85% accurate, that's 85% of the time now, potentially, that you might be able to determine this is a controls issue versus an electrical versus mechanical or vice versa. All right, the other thing, how do you line out subs? Well, this is not just a training thing. It's also a systems thing. So we say, okay, well, we're going to order in kits. When we order our stuff, we're going to order a box of parts. It's going to show up. We're going to give it to the electrical. We're going to have drawings that follow the same standard. We're going to bring our electrical subs in for 4 hours, train them all on our standards, and our technicians are going to be taught to spot check to the standards. And we're going to write our contracts in such a way. Not really a training thing, a little bit of a training thing. And then number 3, right? Setting up networks, making sure they work reliably. Understanding BACnet. BACnet has not really changed. Yeah, SC is a little different, but MSTP and IP, it's been pretty much the same forever. So going and having a checklist. Training doesn't necessarily have to be formalized and PowerPoints and all this stuff. It can be training to a checklist. And that's totally fine. There's lots of businesses that have extremely strong checklists, maybe not the most talented techs, but talented for what they need to be doing. And they can go and do those checklists. So really just think through, what are you trying to solve, and then solve that problem accordingly. All right, so some common mistakes to avoid. 1, I've said it multiple times. I hope you've heard it in this episode. It does not have to be this big omnibus training program. It does not have to be super formalized. It does not have to be 100% classroom based. It does not have to have a dedicated instructor. It can be as simple as training on a checklist and just getting people doing the same thing. Because here's the deal. If you have everyone doing something different, then you're really going to struggle to figure out where the problem is. That's why getting standardized is something I've preached about probably since the first episode of this podcast is, hey, let's get you standardized. Let's really get focused on everyone doing the same thing. Because if everyone's doing the same thing, it's easier to spot like, oh man, that person's totally effing it up. Everyone knows how to wire up this controller, and that person's like licking the screwdriver and shoving it in a 480 socket. I know there's not 480 sockets, but just go with me on that horrible analogy, because no one's going to be licking a screwdriver, hopefully, either way. Anywho, bad analogy, but you get the point. Go and focus on getting standardized so that people are all doing the same thing so that you can notice the outliers. Do not ignore the aspect of assessments. It doesn't have to be this massive assessment like we've built out that has thousands upon thousands of questions and multiple different assessment types. It can be as simple as, hey, go do this. Following this checklist. Oh, you can't do that? Why can't you do that? Oh, because you don't know what that word means? Well, let me teach you. Okay, I've taught you. Go do that checklist again. Oh, you did it. Yay, good job. Kudos. Have a candy bar. All right. Do they even make kudos anymore? I don't even know. Those were one of my like favorite granola bars. Anywho, so doing that and then failing to align training with actual job tasks. Look, it's awesome to train people. People love to be trained. I know there's some people that don't want to be trained, but when I dig into it, oftentimes it's because they're just they just want to do their job. They don't want to get any better. And that's okay. Everyone needs that one person who like is amazing at doing that one thing, but doesn't do anything more. But when you do training just for training's sake and it's not aligned with skills, that's a bad place to be. All right. So let's talk about what we covered here. So in this episode, we went through the problem with most BAS internal training programs. We talked about just how they're not focused on job tasks, how they just try to do too much. There's no clear success. There's no way to retain the knowledge. It's not aligned with kinesthetic, hands-on. Talked about the core principles of training, right? We talked about we need to focus on skills. It needs to be modular and progressive. It needs to have immediate application, and there needs to be measurement. Then we went through the step-by-step framework. We talked about how you need to define your core competencies, right? You got to like lay out the job tasks, assess them, then create some tiered training levels, integrate it with real actual applied learning, do some KPIs, and then reinforce over time. You don't need an LMS. You don't need to build out these like fancy things. Sometimes it's as simple as just basic checklist and training people on that. Talked about some common mistakes, just going over the top, not really focusing on skills. So yeah, at the end of the day, training can be highly impactful to your business. If you like money, and I like money, it is one of the best ways to get an ROI on your spend, because if done right, you can predict an increase in utilization. You can predict an increase in or a reduction in slippage. You can predict increased margins, and you can do this because you know what's causing those issues. You directly measure them and you directly measure afterwards. And you can also, through training, figure out maybe someone doesn't need to be on your team because they just don't have the intellectual capabilities to be trained. I will tell you, having trained tens of thousands of people, that is much rarer than you think. There are people, what I tend to find having run a large training business, if they can't read and can't do basic math, those are like red flags. Those tend to be issues that are insurmountable in our industry because building automation is so much reading and logic. Beyond basic reading and basic math, then it just comes down to work ethic and attitude. So if they could check the box on basic ability to read, basic ability to do math, we're talking division, multiplication, percentages, PEMDAS, that basic stuff, then they're typically pretty good. So as always, everything's available at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/507. Once again, that is podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/507. If you could do me a favor, if you found this valuable, like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Facebook, YouTube. Hit the subscribe, the notification button, give us a like, give us a comment, ask questions. We actually respond to them. We've had some great questions lately. And if you'd like us to help you with your own training program or upskilling your people, definitely reach out. We'd love to help you with that. We're really good at it. We've helped really large universities, Texas A&M, Stanford, Princeton, etc. We've helped some of the largest government agencies, largest OEMs, largest contractors, and we've done it across the globe. So we would love to help you and your team. You can find out about our training and our free skill assessment at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/507. Thanks a ton, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the episode.